Hello again, EFD. These eyebrows are back by popular demand, and today I'm taking you through 10 players whose careers were butchered by Real Madrid. 10. Lassana Diarra. After Chelsea signed Frenchman Lassana Diarra from Le Havre at the age of just 20, he had the world at his feet. He won Young Player of the Year in his first season, and the following season picked up a domestic cup double. But his inability to dislodge the mighty Claude Makélélé saw Diarra move to Arsenal, then quickly on to Portsmouth. And he impressed at Pompey, becoming an instrumental factor in their first FA Cup victory in 69 years. He followed this up by scoring Portsmouth's first ever goal in European competition as they qualified for the Europa League. This grabbed the attention of Real Madrid, who snapped him up in January of 2009 for £18 million, a transfer that remains Portsmouth's biggest ever sale. And he had a good spell at Real Madrid, winning the Copa del Rey and La Liga title, but was slowly pushed out of the team. Andy Shala was the next destination, a big step down from the glitz and glamour of Madrid, and by May 2017, after a few Bosman transfers and termination of contracts, he found himself in Abu Dhabi playing for Al Jazeera. No, not the television station. 9. Emerson. After an extremely successful time in Italy with Roma and Juventus, Emerson was caught up in the Calciopoli scandal, and with the old lady moving down to Serie B, Fabio Capello took his midfield rock to Madrid with him. Although the two moved teams together, Emerson's playing time was limited, and the relationship between coach and player started to break down. The Brazilian couldn't replicate the form he once showed in Italy, and with Juventus on the brink of returning back to the top flight, Emerson declared he wanted to return after just 1 year and was happy to take a wage cut. The player, previously dubbed the Puma for his elegant yet powerful feline movements, never got his move back, but instead moved to Milan, where he only managed a handful of appearances. Unfortunately, he retired 3 years later, having never fully recovered from injury. 8. Nori Sarhan. When Nori Sarhan broke onto the scene, most people were expecting a future legend of the game. He set records that still stand to this day, becoming both the youngest player to play as well as the youngest player to score in the Bundesliga when he was just 16. And when Los Blancos came calling in 2011, it was looking like the Turkish youngster was going to become one of the world's finest midfielders. But alas, it wasn't to be. Having arrived at the Bernabeu injured, and when fit, finding it hard to dislodge the likes of Xabi Alonso and Sami Khedira, his first season was a shambles. And things got even worse for the Turkish international, as Real Madrid signed Luka Modric, making Sarhan surplus to requirements. After a poor loan spell at Liverpool, Real loaned and then sold the player back to Dortmund, where injuries have led him to be a shadow of his former self. 7. Elvir Ballack. This Bosnian striker boasted an incredible record during his time in Turkey with Bursaspor and Fenerbahce. He scored virtually a goal every other game, and he played with the Bosnian national team from its inception in 1998, most notably scoring 4 goals in a game against Estonia just weeks before signing for Madrid. He was specifically targeted by Real's president at the time, Lorenzo Sanz, after he called Ballack the new Rivaldo. But after 11 games and only 1 goal in his first season, Lorenzo was probably regretting that statement, although Ballack did pick up a Champions League winners' medal. The next 2 years saw loan spells at old club Fenerbahce and then Rayo Vallecano, where he was sent back from after they didn't want to pay his €1.2 million salary. A move back to Turkey followed, but the player was nowhere near the quality he was before. A goal every other game turned to a goal in every 10, and Ballack slipped down to lesser teams until his retirement in 2008. But he did release an album in that time, so his talents weren't completely wasted. 6. Julian Faubert. Julian Faubert's loan move to Real Madrid from West Ham stunned the footballing world, and not for the right reasons. Real Madrid were at a bit of a low point, and after failing to get their intended target Antonio Valencia from Wigan, they turned their attention to the Frenchman. The loan spell, as you would expect, was an absolute disaster. He only managed to play a total of 54 minutes for Real, costing the club around £750,000 per game in the 2 matches he played in. Not only that, but he became a laughingstock of the footballing world, as he fell asleep on the bench and missed training because he thought he had the day off. Inevitably, the €6 million option to buy in his contract wasn't taken, and Faubert headed back to East London. Although his time with the Spanish Giants was a massive failure, his son now plays in Barcelona's prestigious La Masia youth setup. Maybe one day he'll repair the reputation of the Faubert name. 5. Giulio Baptista. Giulio Baptista was a monster for Sevilla. In the 2 seasons before his move to Madrid in 2005, he scored 38 goals in 63 league appearances for the White and Reds. This understandably attracted big interest from Arsenal and Real, and he opted for the latter as he wanted to stay in La Liga. You could say he chose the wrong option, as his performances came nowhere near the levels of his time at Sevilla. But his loan spell to Arsenal proved equally disappointing. With Ruud van Nistelrooy and Raul still banging them in, and a fresh-faced Higuain on the scene, Baptista became far more familiar with the bench than the score sheet. A player who was bought for £17 million was sold 3 years later for half that price, a huge indication of the rapport he had lost. Now a free agent at 35, his last outing was for Orlando City, where they compared him to the wrestler Batista. Not a very good wrestling impression from me there. 4. Martin Odegard. Odegard was another youth sensation who burst onto the scene after making his debut at just 15 years old. The Norwegian was hot property, catching the attention of many of Europe's elite clubs. The player who, before he had even turned 16, had been invited and trained with the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United and Bayern Munich, chose Real Madrid as his preferred destination. But unfortunately, Odegard isn't quite the hot property he was before. With players such as Kylian Mbappe and Marcus Rashford showing their worth at the top of the game, the Norwegian's development has been nowhere near his anticipated level. Having said that, there is still plenty of time to improve, but whether that happens at the Bernabeu remains to be seen. 3. Jonathan Woodgate. The man who potentially had the worst debut of all time, Jonathan Woodgate had a very successful few years at Leeds and Newcastle before being snapped up by Los Blancos in 2004. With the player spending the first year of his Real Madrid tenure injured, it wasn't looking good. And to add insult to injury, no pun intended there, Woodgate managed a debut that lives on in football history as one of the worst ever, scoring an own goal and being sent off in the 65th minute for a second bookable offence. Although performances picked up somewhat, he, like many on this list, didn't perform like he did before the big switch, resulting in a loan back to North East England with Middlesbrough, who eventually signed him. From there, injuries and a lack of quality saw him play sporadically until his retirement in 2016. 2. Michael Owen. The pocket rocket himself, Michael Owen was a player that terrified defences. His blistering pace and clinical finishing made him the world's best striker at one point, picking up a Ballon d'Or for his efforts. So when Real Madrid was snapping up Galacticos such as Ronaldo, Raul, Zidane and fellow countryman Beckham, Owen seemed like an obvious addition. Unfortunately, he was benched for a lot of his first months at Madrid, with criticisms from the fans not helping the situation. But Owen did eventually start showing some of his worth, bagging 18 goals in 41 games in all competitions, though he only started 15. With more high-profile signings such as Robinho and Giulio Baptista coming in, Owen moved back to the Prem with Newcastle for more regular football. And from there, his career declined dramatically, and he never reached the heights once projected for him. Though Owen had a great goals-to-game ratio at Madrid, he was not the player he was before, as injuries, a lack of pace and depleting confidence stole what was one of England's most exciting strikers ever from the big stage. 1. Kaka. This list had only one possible ending. Of course, it's Kaka. The Brazilian was, like Owen, a Ballon d'Or winner, and one of the most exciting attacking players ever to grace the game, as part of an AC Milan side who dominated in Europe. Furthermore, Milan signed him for just €8.5 million, which owner and Bunga Bunga enthusiast Silvio Berlusconi described at the time, quite rightly, as peanuts. By comparison, the €65 million Madrid paid for Kaka was only surpassed by the €75 million they had previously shelled out for Zinedine Zidane. And if his time at Madrid was anything to go by, the Brazilian was going to be an instant hit. But injuries didn't help his cause, and to add to his woes, a certain Mesut Ozil took his first team position, leaving Kaka twiddling his thumbs on the bench. Once the most admired player in world football, Kaka has slipped into the shadows, and signing for Orlando City, aged just 32, was a fitting sign of his fall from grace. So that was our top 10 players whose careers were ruined by Real Madrid. But what did you think? Did we miss anyone out, or were we being a bit harsh on some of them? Let us know in the comments below. Now, if you enjoyed this, why not head over to Stat Wars, where another classic battle took place between Chris and Pat on the weekend. And as always, guys, please don't forget to like and subscribe.